Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is all about a solo Void Hunter build, and I gotta say, it's easily one of the best in the entire game, and I don't say that lightly. I truly believe this is one of, if not the best build you can currently do on Hunter, and one of the best solo builds in the entire game, and this is 100% what I'll be using for a lot of my solo content for Hunter. Be sure to subscribe for more content like this, it greatly helps me out, and let's get right into the video. Starting off on Night Stalker, you can really use either Deadfall or Mobius Quiver for your super. Both feature a 30% debuff. Mobius is a bit better for quick DPS, and Deadfall is a little bit better for extending DPS phases by having that debuff stick around a little bit longer, but either work very well. For your abilities, we're going to be using Marksman Dodge just so we reload our equipped weapon every time that we dodge. Jump and Snare Bomb do not matter. And as far as grenade goes, you can really use any that you want. I would highly recommend the Suppressor Grenade just for better synergy with a Fragment I'll go into in a little bit, but you can use any one that you prefer to use. For aspects, the first one is Stylus Executioner, and this is mandatory. After we defeat a weakened suppressor volatile target, it grants us visibility and true sight. True sight is great and all, but invisibility is the main focus behind this aspect. Invisibility is one of the best effects in all of PvE. Being able to break all aggro from basically every single source in the game allows you to reposition yourself for better survivability or ad management, as well as make some risky plays that without Invis you would guaranteed be dead from. When we combine this with all the other effects from this build, Stylus Executioner is mandatory for how potent it makes everything about this build and playstyle in endgame content. For your other aspect, you can use Vanishing Step or Trapper's Ambush, depending on which one you prefer. I personally prefer Vanishing Step just so we get an extra fragment. I also like its compatibility with our dodge reloading our weapons. In a solo playstyle, Trapper's Ambush doesn't really make sense. However, if you want to use this build for group content, you can just use Trappers. For our fragments, I'm granting Echo of Obscurity, which grants us Invis on Finisher Final Blows, which works perfectly with this build. I'm also using Echo of Undermining, which grants our Void Grenade a 15% debuff attached to it. Echo of Starvation, which grants us Devour upon picking up an Orb of Power. And then finally, Echo of Domineering, which grants us a mobility increase after suppressing a target, which, just keep in mind, if you are at tier 10 mobility, will not have an effect on you. But the other effect is it reloads your equipped weapon from reserves. This opens up a lot of DPS possibilities where we can instantly reload our heavy weapon, where we can either use our Suppressor Grenade like I mentioned earlier, our dodge to instant reload, or the suppressing effect from our super to instantly reload as well. If you don't want to use Domineering though, I would recommend use Echo of Persistence, which grants an increase to Invis, Overshields, and Devour's base timer. And just for this build, we can take advantage of all three even at the same time, so this will definitely help out the overall potential of this build. Starting off on our helmet and the mods for today, the first mod is Reaping Wellmaker. Basically, after we dodge, our next weapon Final Blow will spawn in a Void Elemental Well for us. This is a really great and consistent way to spawn in these Elemental Wells, even for endgame content. For other mods, I'm also supporting it with a Harmonic Siphon just for Orbs of Power Gen on Void Weapon Final Blows, as well as a Finder mod support or Heavy Weapon. Again, swap this around if you want to do dual Finders, dual Harmonics, whichever you prefer, just for general build support. For our gauntlets, our first mod is Bountiful Wells, simply doubling our elemental well regen every time we spawn one in. This is mainly for the purpose of picking up said wells for increased ability regen, just to help get our grenade, melee, and dodge back faster. I will recommend a few other mods at the end if you want to swap this out for a different kind of playstyle. Just keep in mind I am building this around ability regen to help us go invisible more often. For other mods, you can really use whichever you prefer. You can use loaders, you can use champion mods based on the activity you're doing, you can use build synergy like Impact Induction for example. Onto our chest piece is gyrfalcon's Halberg, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This was an exotic that was introduced last season and was already a top tier addition to PvE, basically granting pre-nerf weapons of light to your weapons after you came out of being invisible. And this allowed for some insane solo DPS and buff stacking potential. It was also too strong in PvP and ended up getting a rework, and while it might not be as strong in PvP, it got even better for PvE. Now gyrfalcons grant you volatile rounds when coming out of invisibility, and if you remember from Stylus Executioner, anytime that we defeat a volatile target, it grants us invisibility and immediately loops back into gyrfalcons. This means that basically any Void weapon is now completely compatible with building the full potential synergy of Night Stalker, and enables a playstyle where you're basically always invisible, always having volatile rounds, and taking advantage of the effects of invisibility in the first place, along with any other mod support or weapon support that you want. Plus, you can also get the original 35% weapon damage buff by performing a finisher while invisible, which then grants your weapons a 35% weapon damage buff for 6 seconds after performing the finisher. When you keep in mind that we're basically always invisible with this build and our finisher can make us invisible in return, this means that basically any Void weapon, as long as we're playing our cards right, can have a Weapons of Light buff attached to it and Font of Might attached to it. On top of this, we have volatile weapons, an intrinsic debuff of 15 and 30%, and yeah, you can already see where this build is going. It also provides you and your allies with an overshield and increased class ability regen when performing this invis finisher. This one chest piece is easily one of the best exotics in the entire game for PvE content, and makes Void Hunter, which was previously a utility-focused, stealthy option, one of the most aggressive playstyles possible in PvE, with literally no downsides. having some of the best raw utility and damage possible. For the mods on it, I'm personally going Font of Might, granting our Void weapons a 25% weapon damage buff when we pick up a Void Elemental Well. And for other mods, you can use a combination of Resist, you can use a combination of Reserves based on your heavy weapon, whichever you prefer. For our legs, I'm using Elemental Armaments. Basically, periodic final blows with a Void weapon will eventually spawn in a Void Elemental Well. And again, we're taking advantage of this with Bountiful Wells and Reaping Wellmaker. Again, this is mainly for the purpose of spawning in Void Elemental Wells for ability regen, just to help contribute to invisibility. Some other mods, just in case you're not interested in using this for ability regen, can be Elemental Charge, which opens up Charge with Light pathways. And you can use something like High Energy Fire just for a near constant weapon damage bonus. You can use Protective Light for better survivability and damage resist when you need it. As far as other mods go, I'm using Insulation just to increase our class ability regen every time we pick up an Orb of Power, as well as a Scavenger mod to support our heavy weapon. Again, fit this however best fits your playstyle. Finally, onto our cloak. Our first mod is Well of Utility. This grants us additional class ability energy every time we pick up a Void Elemental Well, again helping our abilities which enable the Invis playstyle to come back a lot quicker. Again, I've already went over a few alternatives in case you want to go somewhere else with this build. For other mods, I'm highly recommending Lucent Finisher. Whenever you defeat a Lucent Hive, Lightbearer, or a champion with a finisher, it spawns in heavy ammo for you, and again, if you want to use this with Fire Team, it also spawns it in for your allies. Void Hunter excels at using this mod because once you stun a champion in in-game content, you can simply go invisible, run across the battlefield with no aggro attached to you, finish that champion, immediately go invisible again, pick up that heavy ammo, and keep the whole build going. I highly recommend this for solo play, especially with GMs, for example, because you will be burning through a ton of your heavy ammo without it. The other mod is Solo Operative. This is something I recommend in my last build guide as well, and the reason is it just buffs all outgoing damage you do by 15%. This is for your weapons, this is for your super, this is for your abilities. Any damage that you deal in PvE is going to be buffed by 15% by this. I highly recommend it for literally all solo content. Finally, onto the weapons. Any weapon that does great in endgame content works great for this build. I personally recommend Arbalist. Linear fusion rifles are in a great spot right now, and Arbalist is one of the best out there. It's great at breaking shields. It's the absolute bane of any barrier champion out there. It has great ammo economy being a linear fusion rifle, and it hits very, very hard. Witherhoard is also a great addition to this build. While we're not using Weak and Clear with our build, Witherhoard is still fantastic. It's great at passive DPS and ad clear, and is never a bad weapon to bring into any form of activity. For your primary weapon, I would recommend literally any Void weapon. Any Void weapon is going to have constant Font of Might and volatile rounds with this build, meaning that any Void weapon is a great choice. One mod I do want to specifically highlight is Repulsor Brace, basically granting you an overshield every time you defeat a Void debuff target, which includes volatile rounds, meaning that any Void weapon with Repulsor Brace can not only give you an overshield, but auto reproc your invis, which through gyrfalcons then can reproc the volatile rounds effects, which then plays back into Repulsor Brace, and so on and so forth, and you already see where this is going. So if you want to use a certain Void weapon to fit it for endgame content, say for champion stuns, as long as it's Void, it is a great option. Then finally, onto our heavy weapon. This is where I believe you have the most customization based on whichever activity you're doing or your certain playstyle. I'm going to give you my few recommendations though for my best picks. The first, and the one you've probably been seeing all over every form of social media, is Retrofit Escapade. This thing is absolutely disgusting when combined with gyrfalcons. With my roll of 4 times the charm, target lock, and ambush, we can have some of the highest sustained DPS in the entire game, and it's truly a monster even in endgame content. And again, if we want to, we can add on Font of Might and Gyrfalcon's damage buff to absolutely buff this weapon to insane potential. It is absolutely unfair how great this weapon is in PvE. It is by far my #1 recommendation, but not my only one. But let's get into a few alternatives if you want to do a different playstyle. Falling Guillotine has been a staple for DPS for a long time now. It is still fantastic with this build because again, we can take advantage of Volatile, Font, Gyrfalcon's buff, and an intrinsic debuff of 15 or 30%. The other sword recommendation is Heart Shadow, which has its own invis proccing effect with the Void projectiles. These Void projectiles also debuff enemies hit by them, and with the Catalyst, we have increased mobility while we're invisible, meaning that this is a perfect run and gun playstyle for up close combat, even in endgame content. Any Void rocket launcher also works great, both legendary and exotic. But my personal exotic recommendation is Two-Tailed Fox. The main reason for this is the first rocket actually suppresses on hit. Of course, with this in mind, you can also use Tractor Cannon if you wanted to, having an additional 30% debuff and suppressing everything in sight, and again, taking advantage of the buffs and debuffs I've already gone over. As you can see from the background gameplay, this is one of the most potent builds in PvE, and I firmly believe this is the best build for Hunter for literally any content currently in the game. Gyrfalcon is an objective S-tier exotic, if not one of the best for all of PvE, and it makes Retrofit Escapade and really any Void weapon a monster in any level of content. Because of how strong this build is and how easy it shreds through endgame content, I do believe that this build will be getting some kind of nerf or rework in the near future, whether that's targeting Night Stalker itself or most likely the main issue with Gyrfalcons is yet to be seen, but this is easily one of the best builds in the entire game and it's not hard to see why. We have one of the best utility-focused subclasses in the entire game, with full mod support for our weapons and ability regen, and with gyrfalcons, it enables any void weapon to have, again, volatile rounds attached to it. Let me know what you think of the build down below, as any recommendations for future builds. I'm planning on doing a solo warlock build in the near future, so let me know if you're excited to see that. Don't forget to subscribe for more Destiny 2 content like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.